Resting on the lower Euphrates River, roughly 60 miles south of Baghdad in modern-day Iraq, are ruins. These ruins belong to a civilization heralded for its accomplishments in law and architecture. For thousands of years, this city was revered as a cultural center of Mesopotamia. These people were the Babylonians, and these ruins were their once thriving city of Babylon. Today we're going to talk about some of Babylon's history, as well as the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, while we color the Hanging Gardens of Babylon page from the Tango Travels Volume 1 coloring book. If you want to follow along, pause the video, use the link in the description, and get the files for yourself. You will get this page, along with 24 other locations that only cost a dime each. Once you download the files, you can either print off the PDF file or open the PNG in whatever program you like to use to paint digitally. Today I'm going to be using the PNG file, and I'm going to be using that in Photoshop. With that out of the way, let's get started. I'm going to start by blocking out all the base colors I want to use on separate layers. This is going to make it easier later on when I start working on textures and lighting. But there's no wrong way to go about this. It's really about enjoying yourself and getting into that flow state of coloring. I'm going to use the magic wand tool where I can use my line art to make a quick selection that will help me color faster. Once I do that, I'm going to use select and expand to get rid of any leftover halo that might be coming off my line art. Where I can't make that selection, I'm going to paint in those sections by hand. Now while I do that, I'm going to tell you a brief history of Babylon. Babylon itself was founded in the 3rd millennium BCE between 3000 and 2001 BCE. This isn't a singular event that can be marked in history like July 4th, 1776 or the rise of the Roman Republic in 509 BC. It's a gradual process that took place over centuries. During these early centuries, Babylon would have been overshadowed by the much larger neighbors like Ur, Uruk, Lagash, Kish. All these cities were from an even older civilization called Sumeria. Around the 2nd millennium BCE, Babylon starts to become more prominent. Up to this point, the only evidence we have of its existence is on a clay tablet that mentions the city by name in the nearby Akkadian Empire. So the first figure, well, there's plenty of people that come before him, but the first we're going to talk about comes into our story in 1792 BCE. This is where the start of King Hammurabi's reign over Babylon begins. You may have heard this name before because of the code of laws that is attributed to him. The famous phrase, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, comes from his code of laws, in which the punishment for a crime would be like for the cost of a crime. One such law was, quote, if a man knock out the teeth of his equal, his teeth shall be knocked out, unquote. Fair is fair, right? We know this because in 1901, a stone stele, which is like a stone pillar that describes 282 laws, was found in the city of Susa, and that's in modern-day Iran. You can still see the stele in the Louvre, the museum in Paris, today. Hammurabi also expanded Babylonia's control into Mesopotamia, conquering those cities like Ur, Uruk, Lagash, and Kish, and all those other cities that once overshadowed our tiny little upstart. Hammurabi's conquests fall apart, though, after his death in 1750 BCE. And the city of Babylon changed hands from the Hittites to the Kassites, and finally goes into possession of the infamous Assyrians. The Assyrians were known, or at the very least, wanted to be known as the most brutal rulers of Mesopotamia. They hoped this fear would keep the region in line and under their rule, though it wasn't enough to keep the Babylonians under control, and the city rebelled. Unfortunately for the Babylonians, their rebellion failed. Sennacherib, king of Assyria, sacked, razed, and scattered the ashes of the city to the wind. The Assyrians had the knack for this great and terrible style of propaganda. Their walls of their city in Nineveh were etched with murals and descriptions of how they ruined the lives of everyone they encountered. So, the destruction of the city does draw some backlash. Like we said earlier, the city was revered as a cultural and religious center. So Sennacherib's sons don't take the destruction very kindly and decide to assassinate their father and take his throne. His son, and forgive me for my pronunciation, I am an artist and not a historian, Shadon rebuilds the city and makes sure that his name is inscribed over every piece of the reconstruction. I mean, you know, he likes to write his name on bricks. When Assyria falls, we get a new ruler in Babylon named Nabopolassar, who founds the Neo-Babylonian Empire. But it is his son, Nebuchadnezzar II, that will outshine him, at least in our story. Nebuchadnezzar will expand the Neo-Babylonian Empire throughout Mesopotamia and the Levant. If you don't know what the Levant is, it's where Israel is now, and Lebanon and all those states along the Mediterranean coast in the Middle East. He is specifically important to us because he is credited by Flavius Josephus, this was a Roman Jewish historian and general, with building the Hanging Gardens of Babylon for his wife. Nebuchadnezzar saw Babylon at its height, and after he died at the age of 80 in 562 BCE, Babylon began its decline. And within 30 years, Babylon is conquered by the Achaemenid Persian Empire, led by Cyrus the Great. Babylon itself will be revered as one of the great cities of the world under Persian rule, and even after Alexander of Macedon conquers the region, its relevance is still honored. Upon Alexander's death in Babylon, the city falls under control of his general Seleucus. Babylon slowly declines until 141 BCE, when the city is claimed to be deserted by the Parthian Empire. Now we have all our base colors down, let's move on to adding texture and variation in our coloring. We're going to create a clipping mask above each layer that we want to paint on top of. You can do this multiple times, so don't feel like you're limited to one mask. Honestly, more the better. I like to think about this as adding in colors that would represent the flushing in someone's cheeks or the different sediments that are smushed together to make stones. I'm not thinking about how light is affecting anything yet. I'm sure there are plenty of methods that other people would use that are equally valid. This is just the way that I've been working digitally. And I say as a drawing student, not a painting student, so I'm sure all the painters are thinking to themselves how terribly wrong I am at this moment. So we're going to use these masks to keep all our brush strokes from running over and save us time on any cleanup we would have to do otherwise. It's best practice to always name your layers, so if you have to go back later and make changes, it's way easier to tell what you're looking at. But I'm not always the best at sticking to that rule. Once you have a section done, you can group all those layers into a folder, and this will make the next section easier as well. While I do that, let's talk more about the Hanging Gardens themselves. The Hanging Gardens themselves are a matter of debate. While we have accounts from ancient sources of the garden's existence, we have yet to find the archaeological site. These accounts come from a variety of authors, including the Roman Jewish historian we talked about earlier, Flavius Josephus, Greek-Sicilian historian Diodorus Siculus, Roman historian Quintus Curtius Rufus, and Strabo, a Pontic Greek geographer, philosopher, and historian. Unfortunately, none of these authors are writing from first-hand experience and are citing older Greek works which have been lost to time. Our first account comes from Flavius Josephus, who is quoting, Berosus Caldeus, who would have lived under the rule of Seleucus. His account is as follows, quote, "In this palace he erected very high walls, supported by stone pillars, and by planting what was called a pensile paradise, and replenishing it with all sorts of trees, he rendered the prospect an exact resemblance of a mountainous country. This he did to gratify his queen, because she had been brought up in Media, and was fond of the mountainous situation." Unquote. Mountainous situation. What a translation. One source you would think would give us a first-hand account of the Hanging Gardens would be Herodotus, known as the father of history, and also known as the father of lies. Though his account of Babylon doesn't mention the Hanging Gardens outright, he does mention the step pyramid structure of a ziggurat, which may be the Hanging Gardens or a temple. All the sources seem to agree that there was a step pyramid building that drew water up from the Euphrates River with an Archimedes screw to water the lush vegetation covering the construction. We have our textures and our color variations, so now we can go on to adding our lighting. Since Babylon is in a hot and arid part of the world, we're going to have a lot of sunshine. Plus, I think having a lot of sun will also help show off all that Bronze Age glamour that must have been put into the gardens. I typically use 3 layers of shadow. One's like the base level, one is where like overlapping shadows meet, and that third is like the super deep darks. But I don't think I'll need to apply that here, so I'm going to do 1 layer of my base shadows and the second of where the overlapping shadows meet. Since we have a lot of sunlight, I don't think we're going to get to that deep dark, except maybe the doorway and windows on the top of the ziggurat. For light, I'm going to do 3 layers. My blend mode typically depends on the result, but for the first 2, I often use soft light. Then I'll use a layer set to screen for those really strong highlights. And if it's a powerful glare, like the reflection of a harsh light in someone's eye or a reflective surface, I'll make another layer above the line art and add that pure color light to like the the black of Tango's eye or the reflection off any of the tiles. There are a few theories that try to explain the absence of the Hanging Gardens. One is that it is under the Euphrates River. This could have happened as the current of the river shifted over time. The city of Babylon does show a lot of evidence of flooding. There's a lot of stratification, so buildings being built on top of buildings on top of other buildings. This wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility. Another theory posed by Stephanie Mary Daly is that the Hanging Gardens were actually constructed by our old friend Sennacherib, the same Sennacherib that ordered Babylon be burned to the ground and its ashes scattered to the wind. So Sennacherib's gardens were at Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, and they have been excavated. During this excavation, we found an impressive system of aqueducts and canals. We also have inscriptions that depict gardens growing on top of aqueducts. You can see these today. It sure looks like what we think the Hanging Gardens would have looked like. Confusion could have arisen out of the name of Babylon itself. The word Babylon means gates of the gods, and could have also referred to the city of Nineveh, as Sennacherib had renamed the city's gates after gods. Also, accounts given by those who had followed Alexander the Great's army would have camped near the ruins of Nineveh before the famous Battle of Gaugamela. While we don't have these accounts, we have quotations from later writers about them, and the descriptions match that of the Gardens of Nineveh. I think that in lieu of having the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, it's nice to know that the mythical raised gardens are real in one form or another, whether it be in Nineveh, or still waiting to be found underneath the Euphrates River. The final step is to make sure our layers are matching the atmosphere we're trying to present. First, let's mess with the contrast of each layer. I've grouped my objects into a background, a midground, and a foreground so I can apply these effects separately. Let's make a levels adjustment layer and turn that into a clipping mask over our background group. I'm going to move the sliders here so there's less contrast in the background to give us the illusion of more depth. I will do the same for the middle ground, but just a slight adjustment to make sure I'm giving it more contrast in the background and less in the foreground. Next, I like to mess with the colors a bit. By adding an adjustment layer over the whole composition. I really want this to feel warm, like there's a lot of light being reflected off the walls and sandy streets of Babylon. And once I have all the colors where I want them, I'll call it finished. I want to thank you for watching the video, and if you bought the coloring book, thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm an artist that does all this by himself, so every purchase really helps me do this more often. So thank you. Please check back later. I plan to have more coloring books. Keep your eye on the store. If you liked what you did today, or if you bought another book and you liked it, please give a review. It helps the store grow. But yeah, thanks again for spending your time with me. I'll see you next time.